I'm Chris Marzwanian, a personal injury attorney with Marz Law. I'm not a mental health expert by any means, but I am a human who walks with clients throughout some of the hardest seasons of their lives. We talk about cases, of course, but we also talk about those that are injured and their injuries, especially those that are married, those that are parents, and the way you show up at work or in the world and how these injuries have correlated with what they're going through. Often a spouse or partner will call me and they'll say to me, "Hey, Chris, things aren't the same at home." Those conversations matter to me just because the case does. So joining me today is a guest who spends his career helping people find their way through crises of the heart and the mind. I'm going to let him introduce his own credentials and background so you can hear in his own words. Dr. Michael Adamse, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thanks for having me on your show. I understand this is your inaugural show, so I feel very privileged to be on your show, so thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so some quick background on me. I trained at University of Miami and Yale University School of Medicine. Been in practice for a good 35 years and see a wide variety of patients and wore a lot of different hats in my career. So I had an NPR show for a long time. I also have written 4 books, fiction and nonfiction, assistant professor of psychology at University of Miami, assistant professor of psychology at Nova Southeastern University. And on September the 14th, after September 11th, 2001, I joined the Army at the ripe old age of 49, wow. And they let me in. So I went to the medical corps. Yeah, I went to the medical corps for a few years and served the Army, and it was a very rich experience. But what's relevant to you is my practice. I once added it up, Chris. I've seen about 90,000 hours worth of patient time. So that's a lot of people. And what's relevant for you in your show, of course, is that many people that have come across my practice have had injuries of various sorts, right? Illnesses of various sorts. So I've worked very closely with that population, so I'm pretty familiar with it.
Doctor, you mentioned something very interesting to me. You've encountered many cases, right? And in terms of the emotional weather, right? So let's start with the emotion that move in after an injury, often quietly, sometimes like a storm. So what would you say are the prime emotions that this quiet storm starts to reveal itself?
Well, it starts with empathy, right? Okay. Somebody's been injured. So the spouse or the partner or family members or whomever are involved with that person's life usually respond with empathy, right? And that's the initial phase. But as time goes on, it depends on the person's disability, it depends on their injury. As time goes on, that becomes really challenging, right? So what I'm going to say over and over again in this podcast is that communication is key. It's really key. And, forewarned is forearmed, they used to say. So the more people know about almost what to expect, the better they'll be prepared to deal with those kind of challenges.
Certainly. For instance, anger. For the injured person, where does anger tend to land? The body, the self, the world. For a caregiver, how does anger show up in terms of like resentment, helplessness? What can you recall in your practice and with your patients? How is anger a significant force?
It's a very significant force because in order to be angry, you have to be frustrated first. See, that's the model. So you have to be frustrated, right? So if a person's been injured or the spouse is dealing with somebody who's been injured, there's a lot of frustration. Again, depending on their disability and their mobility and how it's affected them mentally, emotionally, physically, right? So the real precursor to anger is frustration, right? So the anger can be manifested in a number of ways. It can be the person who did the injury to them, right? Certainly the object of who injured them. It could also sometimes segue into the spouse or the family members, right? Because over time, and we'll get to that, but over time it wears people down.
Sure.
Empathy wears people down after a while, right?
See.
And so that's how it really starts. Frustration leads to anger, and it's important to understand that emotion, that it's a natural response. It's not an unnatural response.
And the first line of encountering anger would be like a caregiver or a family member.
Yes, they're the first line of defense, right? They're the ones who have to deal with it day in, day out.
Sure.
It's not like they go to a doctor's office for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or a test or a procedure or PT or anything like that. They're dealing with that person typically 24/7. So that creates the conditions for frustration. Again, now personalities enter this, because obviously there's some people who have a lot of empathy.
Sure.
All the way down to people who don't have much patience and much empathy to begin with. So those variables enter the equation quite often. So personality has a lot to do with mitigating or enhancing the problems.
Now, the people that are depicting this specific force, are they naturally angry people to begin with that just it comes out? Or is this something specifically subsequently because of these injuries and they don't realize it?
It could be one of both, really. I mean, they could have a predilection to being angry types of people, right? So the frustration leads to the aggression because they typically already have a baseline of frustration, anger in their own lives, okay? All the way to the person who's been pretty mellow, pretty even-keeled, but now they're faced with a major life-changing event. So now it brings out a lot of frustration, a lot of anger. So it could be a baseline issue where they already have that kind of in the background of their personalities.
Sure.
Or it could be something that's unique to that injury. Could go either way.
I see. Do you typically see the caregiver or the spouse, do you see them changing in terms of their character, more angry perhaps because of this injury?
Yes, they can get quite angry themselves because they've been injured indirectly, right?
Sure.
They may not have the physical illness, injury rather, right? But they certainly have also been impacted by it, because now their lives have changed. Again, it comes down to what is the nature of the injury, how much has it impacted their lives. And so, again, it depends, but typically speaking, the person who's the caregiver over time will definitely, and we'll touch on this, definitely get caregiver burnout if they don't take good care of themselves.
I see. Would you say guilt is also a factor, doctor? On, let's say, both sides, the injured partner may feel guilty about needing help.
Yes.
And the caregiver may feel guilty for feeling tired or wanting a night off.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because think about it, right? The person who could typically say, hey, I'm going to go to the refrigerator and get a glass of water. Well, guess what? Now, because they're injured, they may not be able to get up and get a glass of water. So they have to ask their partner or their spouse or significant other, family member, whatever, hey, can you go get that for me? And over time, that person can start feeling guilty because they can feel like, oh my gosh, my partner's got a huge burden here. I'm having to ask him for everything, everything. And the guilt can come from the loved one, from the party, the spouse can come from them too, because they're getting like, oh, look, it wasn't their fault, but this is getting old. This is really getting to me.
Sure.
I mean, this is the 10th glass of water you wanted today, right? So it adds up. So they can feel really guilty, like, oh, I'm not supposed to be angry or upset. But again, communication is key, because if people understand it's a natural course of action to be frustrated, it's a natural course of action to be angry, to become aware of that. And the key is always going to be communication between the parties. Always will be that.
Sure.
And the more they have a good communication, the more they're going to be able to mitigate this and work as you would say, a team. That's really the way it works as a team.
Absolutely. And you mentioned being a team. So how beyond that would you say, how do you help couples move from blame to permission and teamwork?
Because I tell them the way to get through this life-challenging event, and by the way, as you know, this could be something that is time limited because the person improves, right?
Yeah.
Or it could be permanent, right? So you have to almost in the beginning say, look, here's what we can reasonably expect. And we have to work as a team to do this, okay? You've been injured, and your loved one who's taking care of you has also been injured. So you're kind of maybe in different ways, but you're kind of on the same boat, right? So the more you work together, the more you decide, you know what, how are we going to manage this together, right? The better off that couple's going to be. So
Sure. You mentioned earlier, doctor, about caregiver burnout. What are early, often missed warning signs?
Missed warning sign would be the fact that you're starting to build up resentment and anger, right? But you're not verbalizing this. Now, this is really important because that can be a precursor to depression and anxiety, right? They suppress the emotion because they feel like, I can't really complain about what's going on because this person is suffering, my loved one is suffering.
Right.
So you have to be aware of that emotion. I'm getting frustrated, I'm getting angry, I might be getting a little depressed, that kind of thing. So those are early warning signs.
Sure.
And what I always tell people with caregiver burnout, which is almost inevitable, with a long-term serious injury, almost inevitable, that person has got to carve out time for themselves, to take care of themselves. Like you said earlier, a night off, going out with friends, making sure that they still have a life outside of that injury. That's going to be more challenging for the person with the injury, depending on what the injury is, because their mobility is going to be affected usually. So they're not going to be able to go out with friends quite so often and hang out with people. So, but the caregiver absolutely has to do that.
Okay. In your opinion, obviously, I'm not your patient here, but
Sure.
This is something that I find, very important. As I said before, I'm not a licensed expert in any way, but I do delve in these types of conversations.
Sure.
And it's not usually just my client. My client will invite a spouse, a partner, and we'll delve in. And I feel like, any attorney or any human, they want to invest in themselves so they can be better for others.
Yes.
And I feel like, what are some of just me or anyone else, what are some opinions we can give in terms of what boundaries or routines are reliable to protect the relationship from sliding into just caregiver or care receiver type of roles only?
Well, that's an excellent question, because even if there's not an injury and I'm working with couples, right? Yeah. You've heard of the date night, right? You've heard of that, right?
Course.
So we get busy with our lives between careers, kids, and whatever, right? So we're going to compound that with an injury. It gets even more challenging. I always tell people, listen, you have to carve out time together. Put it on the schedule. You literally have to put it on the schedule, because if you don't do that, it's going to go into the ether. People will say, oh, yeah, we need to spend time watching a movie. We need to have dinner together, have a glass of wine together. Sure. But the reality is, unless they actually make a date, the chances of them doing that get diminished significantly. So I always tell people, anchor your relationship in some positive events, whether it's a movie, it's a Netflix series, whatever it is, right? Breaking bread together, making something, right?
Absolutely.
Of your lives. So they can rebalance it, because the whole life shouldn't be around the injury, should it, right? That's to the detriment of both parties.
Well said, doctor. I'm going to take that one down.
You going to take that one down? You can quote me on that, Chris.
I will. I'm going to use that one, doctor. Absolutely. Now, this one's a hard one for me.
Sure.
And it's because I'm not trained specifically to identify aspects of the mental health.
Sure.
What would you say psychological effects of pain in terms of, I'm just the legal advocate, but my clients have access to resources in terms of physical and mental health providers. So how can I identify better the pain changing moods, or the moods changing based on pain? And what patterns do you see in terms of, let's say, withdrawal or hypervigilance, avoidance of touch? Let's say one calls me and says, Chris, I can't sleep anymore. So how do I know that's just sleep deprived based on pain? Do I ask more questions?
I think it's fine to ask more questions.
Okay.
You don't have to be a trained, licensed mental health professional to be a human. So I think when you work with a client, it's okay to ask those kind of questions. One of my rotations at the University of Miami was in the pain clinic.
See.
Okay? So what I learned in the pain clinic is you have to make a distinction between acute pain and chronic pain. Now, if it's acute pain, you're like, oh man, I have this back injury, for example, but it looks good. It looks like with physical therapy, 3, 6, 9 months, I'm going to be much better. That's one thing, gives the person hope.
Right.
If it's a permanent disability, that's magnified in terms of challenge, right? Because the person can start to feel depressed and hopeless, because they feel like, oh my gosh, this is not going to get better. I'm always going to have to ask my spouse for a glass of water from the refrigerator because I can't get up the rest of my life. And that happens in cases, right? Yeah. It's very powerful. So we always have to make that distinction, acute versus chronic, right?
Yeah.
So, and this is where medications might come in, okay? People might benefit from an antidepressant, anti-anxiety medication, sleep medication, because pain also interferes with sleep, right? People can't get in the right position, or they can start obsessing, which is a problem. They'll be lying there in bed thinking about the same thing over and over and over again. And in your case, in your work, they may be obsessing about the injury itself, the accident itself.
Sure.
I had a client who was in a terrible car accident, and she couldn't get out of her head. She remembered every moment when the car came through the intersection and hit her, and the injury she had, and the ambulance ride to the hospital.
My goodness.
And so every time she drives through an intersection now, she's quite aware that a car could go through the light and hit her. So these are the kind of sequelae, psychological sequelae, that people experience post-accident.
Wow, Doc. I mean, you hit it exactly on its head. These are conversations I have with my clients all the time. They'll tell me, look, I can't even drive on the road more than 2 minutes without feeling like someone's gonna bump into me or crash into me again. And you know, and I thank you for giving me those, you know, those signals of how being okay. And going back just one step, I feel like in terms of society, there's no longer, correct me if I'm wrong, that taboo of speaking about mental health. And certainly in law as well. I remember being in law school, and you know, that was a driving force at my law school, and even the Florida bar, you know, emphasizing of how important that is.
Definitely.
And I was just blown away of how accepting this has become. And it's very critical, you know, cerebral types of work, and also going back to what's relevant is in terms of clients having those open conversations. And it gives me markers as to what to advocate for. And I feel like if, you know, the more time we put in and the more questions we ask in terms of experts in your field, we'll have a better criteria of things that we can use within our repertoire of, at the end of the day, we can't put the person back together.
That's right.
But the best thing we can do is advocate for what has been harmed.
That's right.
The injury. And some of these are non-economic. You can't put a value on it unless you can precisely indicate what the problem is and the source of that, and going back to the incident. So, you know, in terms of my own opinion, I like the direction in terms of how people are more open in discussing these things. And the last thing I want to do is not be informed enough. And being open to going to more educational seminars or speaking to people like you, so I can maybe not diagnose them, but at least point them in the right direction. So,
well, you know, Chris, prior to the show, you and I once talked about the loss of consortium. Right? Which is a very, very real issue with people who've gone through pain, right? So the thing is, and most people think, oh, loss of consortium, you mean they're not sleeping together sexually, right? Well, that could be a big part of it, obviously, but it actually is a much broader definition than that, right? It's intimacy, it's holding, it's affection, it's romance, it's friendship, anything that has to do with the intimacy of a relationship, a close relationship. So people lose that because, honestly, if somebody's had a serious injury, they're probably not going to be interested in an intimate relationship anymore. Or if they're interested in, like, psychologically, they may not be able to act on it because physically it's painful, it's difficult, right? Being touched, certainly sexually. So it definitely affects people in a very robust way.
That's a very key factor in terms of what I wanted to kind of discuss with you. So in Florida, loss of consortium is the spouse's own claim. So if people that don't know this, we're not talking about the victim.
Right. Okay.
We're talking about a partner, a spouse, someone that has that intimate relationship with them. And it's the loss of that partner's service, the comfort, the society, and the attention caused by the effects, the negative effects that have now caused and touched that relationship. Whereas, you know, even juries are instructed to hold weight to this in terms of compensating that partner or that spouse. Have you had any instances, doctor, in terms of where you've either provided criteria or been brought in as an expert to kind of explain this in a jury setting or in a legal setting? I have been asked, I haven't had to go to court for this, but I've been asked by various attorneys over the course of my career, can you weigh in on this phenomena, right? And I've done a couple of depositions that way. I haven't been in the courtroom for it, but I've done a couple of depositions. And the fact is, loss of consortium, right? I'm spelling that wrong in my brain, but you know what I mean. So the thing is, right, you can't see that on an MRI. You can't see it on an MRI. So most people
can appreciate, even a jury can appreciate, you know what, there's no question this is affecting the relationship. So if you make a case for that and, get the input from the various partners, right, from the partner and the injured person, that can give a jury, if you will, a good picture of what does this mean in your relationship, right? Mm-hmm. How has it affected you guys? Most people, the average person is going to be able to understand that, identify with it. So that's what I've said in my depositions in the past, that, patient X, there's no question patient X's relationship has been grossly affected, right? And then I could give the parameters around that, sexually, intimately, affection, that kind of a thing. So there's no question, because I see it in my practice a lot.
Doctor, thank you for opening this. And I'm sorry if I delve too much into it.
No, it's good.
It's only because in this work, I often feel like two things at once: a lawyer and informally a sounding board.
Sure.
I never present myself as a clinician, but clients and their partners open up about what's happening at home with their kids, with who does what, with what feels lost. We form real connections in the process.
Sure.
And oftentimes when the case ends, I don't get the privilege of seeing the next chapter,
right.
but they still have to live.
Yes.
Live with it.
Yes.
So beyond the injury and beyond any lawsuit, how can one incident echo into the future, sometimes across generations?
Well, that's a great question, because now let's think about that for a second. You have an injured party. Now let's say it's a mother or father of small kids, right? Yeah. Those kids, or even adolescents, young adults, they witness the change. They see it. Or dad or mom used to do this. They go to work. They can't go to work anymore. Can't drive a car anymore. They have chronic back problems. They're upset. They're crying. So the kids can witness that, and that becomes an impression, right?
Absolutely.
Normally, kids think of their parents as like Superman and Superwoman, right? But the reality is, when they see something like that, it can definitely developmentally affect how they feel about themselves.
I see.
Because it creates a sense of insecurity.
Yeah.
Because you always look at parents and say, they know what they're doing, even though they don't often, right? But they look like they know what they're doing. Right. But now mom's injured, dad's injured. So, now I have to think for myself a little more, like maybe that sense of security is being challenged. So intergenerationally, it can affect children. Mm-hmm. And then further down the road, when those young adults become adults and maybe have their own families, it can play with their psychology for sure.
What would you want a couple to put in place during the case? Like habits, conversation, simple rituals, so that life after the case has a better foundation. Something that I can maybe guide them along right before I say, hey, unfortunately, here's your check. I've got to part ways with you, but
right.
What would you?
Well, Chris, I alluded to it before. I was talking about caregiver burnout. Well, it goes both directions. The person who's been injured also can be like a little skittish about being around their spouse all the time, right? Mm-hmm. Out of necessity or what have you, right? So they both need their own space. They need their own space, mm-hmm. because even healthy couples, they need time apart. Now, if somebody's had a serious injury, right, they're likely to be at home, if not somewhere else, right? But they're likely to be home all the time, except for doctor's appointments, physical therapy, that kind of a thing. So I always advise people moving down the road, carve out time for yourselves. I know I keep coming back to this theme, but it's really important because both parties need to do that. And they need to check in with each other. I practice what I preach. So Friday nights, my wife and I sit down. She has a very busy career. We hang out for half an hour, 45 minutes. Okay, how was your week? Let's talk about it, right? How we doing? Let's talk about it.
Okay.
Because we're doing the status check.
So you're checking in on each other.
Check in on each other. And that becomes an important part of the routine, if you will. I see. Right?
How long does that normally last?
Well, I know what I'm doing, so about 30 seconds.
Okay.
But normally,
how long should I last when I'm asking my wife?
You're pretty sharp, Chris. You're definitely a 5-minute guy. You get it done.
Okay.
Let's get your wife on the phone.
We're still talking about communication.
That's right. That's right. Let's get her on the phone.
All right. Call her now. But, so you're saying pretty much this is like a form of protection.
It really is.
You're protecting, I guess, that friendship element, creating micro rituals amongst the relationship. Would you say like short walks or, doing things together? would
Yeah,
also be.
all those things are important, but you got to remember something. We're doing an assumption here.
Yeah.
The assumption is the foundation, the relationship to begin with, was pretty good. Now we have those, and this alters that relationship radically, right? But we also have foundations sometimes where they weren't getting along so good. They've had a difficult marriage, for whatever reasons, right? So when you have an injury like this, that compounds that problem, doesn't it? Because now you have to care for somebody that you don't like that much.
Yeah.
So I've seen that too.
Wow.
That's true.
That's
It's like, I have this obligation. I married this person or whatever. I'm committed to this person or whatever. But guess what? I don't particularly like them. But now I got to take care of them.
Wow.
So that creates a lot of problems for actually both parties, because even the party that's injured is like, well, I didn't like him or her that much to begin with either. Now they got to take care of me.
I see.
That makes it even worse.
Yeah, my conversations don't go that deep, but I'm when you said that, I got goosebumps thinking about it. Like, wow, you make a great point.
Sure.
The light bulb goes off. Why am I really doing this?
Right.
So, would you say what are realistic wins in when you see patients, or I see clients within, let's say, a 1 month, 3 month, or 12-month period, that we know what the issues are, but what are these small little wins they can do together?
Well, that's a great question, Chris, because the thing is, I call them micro victories. Have to set like modest goals. I mentioned I used the example before, go get water for yourself, right? You're going to get tired of doing that 10 times a day. But maybe that person over time can start doing some things on their own. And that's, like I said, that doesn't have to even be something major, something minor. But if you establish those goals, right? Because you've done this many times, I'm sure. Even looking at physical therapy, I can tell you right now, when people go to physical therapy, any physical therapist is going to tell you the homework is critical. You want to get better? It's not going to be 3 times a week for an hour in my office. It's going to be you doing your homework. Let me give you a bunch of exercises. So now that segues into a person's motivation.
I see.
Right? Are they a person who's self-motivated, self-starting, that kind of a thing? So I call them micro victories. So setting goals 3, 6, 9 months. Say, hey, let's set this goal. Maybe right now you can't walk 20 feet without a lot of pain, but guess what? Maybe that's our goal. You can walk 60 feet in 3 months, that kind of thing. So we got to build on any and every opportunity to get better, because even if you look at a serious injury, there probably is a space within that rubric where the person can do a little better.
Okay. And the significance of doing the homework, but teaming up with like a pro like yourself in terms of couples therapy, I'm assuming that it's not just the mental health of the person that has gone through a manifestation of a physical pain, but also the teamwork in getting therapy with a professional like yourself that can affect their sexual health and caregiver respite. So it's got to be the teamwork that you've been mentioning throughout this conversation.
Well, Chris, when we started this interview, you asked me to introduce my background. I said I added up around 90,000 hours of patient care, right? Here's one thing I learned over that time, and that is that everybody wants to be understood.
I see.
That's the key.
That's powerful.
Everybody wants to be understood. So even when you're working with couples, right, he wants to tell his story, she wants to tell her story. Instead of, oh, you're wrong, it's more like this is their experience. And if they feel understood, that's golden. That goes a long way. Sure. And even in your work, when people have, tell you about their injury and how it's affected them, right?
Absolutely.
And you kind of handhold them a little bit.
Yeah.
But they appreciate you having empathy. They appreciate
Hope
you.
so.
No,
I
sure
try my
do.
best.
Well, you have that nature. Yeah. So that was
Caring.
a compliment, by the way.
Thank you, Doc.
Sure.
Thank you. And that's the thing. Like, what really resonated a lot with me today is when you said hope.
Yes.
It's not in these special encounters that I have based on, whether it's the caregiver, whether it's the loss of Consortium, or the mental health of the direct client. It's not just the hope of, hey, the end of the case, but the hope of living, the hope of continuing on.
Yes.
Because the motivation factor, this thing is not going to cure themselves, right? They have to they have to will it into existence, it seems, based on what all the instances that you have.
Sure.
Who have been the most successful patients in overcoming some of the, obviously not everything is curable.
The ones who come in already with a life attitude of trying to be a positive person. Now I'm going to throw something else in the mix, right? People who are spiritually connected do well. So that could be anything. You could be Jewish, you could be a Muslim, you could be Catholic,
Sure.
Christian, whatever your background is. Those who have some spiritual connection, who engage in some connection with a higher power, if you will.
Okay.
And again, there's no bias here, whoever
Right.
or whatever that is.
Sure.
Those people fare a little bit better
see.
because they're able to say, you know what, I've got this bad situation in my life, but I have faith. I have faith and I have hope.
Absolutely.
That, you know, this is a temporary situation. Just living on this planet's temporary.
I personally believe in that. I subscribe to it. And
100%.
it's not, whatever faith you have, and I think that there is something there
Sure.
that goes beyond just humans' will. There's got to be something there, and I do subscribe to it. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And I try to be, I've maybe emphasized on that once or twice before. It was like I asked them, hey, what are some sort of spiritual connections you may have? Do you want to share that with me? And just something conversational. Obviously, not everyone wants to speak on that, but it's a good conversational piece, and it's good to see that there's therapeutic aspects to spirituality as well.
That's an evolution too. Now, as part of protocol and intake with new clients and stuff, you always ask them now. You ask them, do you have a spiritual belief system? Does that help you? That kind of thing. You're not pushing an agenda. You're just asking the questions. So you asked before what helps people, certainly the spiritual side, but also their attitude. Like if they go into an injury or a situation where they already are kind of positive people, that makes it a lot easier. Because like I said before, they're kind of negatively oriented. They're depressed to begin with, anxious to begin with. This compounds the problem. So I'm going to circle back to personality. So personality has a lot to do with mitigating or exacerbating stress. It just does.
Sure. Let me pivot a little bit.
Sure.
When couples share their reality in a legal setting, how can they do it with dignity? And what languages help, would you say, juries understand the loss of companionship, affection, and shared life without invading privacy?
Well, that's tricky. I mean, not to invade privacy, but I think what would compel juries more is the human side. Tell us a story. Basically, I want to hear a story. So if the husband talks about the wife and what's missing in the relationship, the wife talks about the husband and what's missing in the relationship, or significant other, right? That goes a long way, but it needs to be in plain English, right? Can't be theoretical, can't be abstract. But if it's a first-person story, jury can resonate to that.
Yeah.
My wife used to be able to do this. My husband used to be able to do that. They can't do that anymore.
Sure.
And that affects me, affects him, affects her. So the more human the story is, the more the jury will resonate to it.
See, kind of creating a connection with someone by way of a storytelling.
Yes, because stories are what connect us.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a narrative, right, Chris?
Hey, I truly believe in wanting to understand someone's story because we all want to be understood. You said it yourself, Doc. And I think the best way is, hey, where do you come from? What were your parents like?
Yes, definitely.
And is that how most of your conversations begin, Doctor?
Yeah, they do. I mean, I want to know the person's background. I don't belabor their childhood and background too much, but I got to know where they came from because that tells you a lot. What kind of struggles did they have? What were their parents like? Were they loving parents? Were they difficult parents? Were they strict parents? That has a lot to do with the person's evolution of their personality.
Sure.
So that background is important. It's definitely important. Now, you got to remember something too. The complaint I hear a lot is a lot of women will tell me, oh, their husbands don't listen to them. The husbands are not good communicators. The husbands would rather be on their phone and watching football, right? So those are elements in place even before an injury or if there's no injury, right?
Sure.
So it becomes even more important for the husband, let's say the husband in this case, all right? Could be the wife, but the husband in this case, it's more important for them to be good listeners more than ever, and be connected. And it doesn't have to be 24/7.
Right.
But when you give them focus,
give
them focus. Put the phone away, turn off the TV, turn off the internet, and if it's 10 minutes of focus, it's going to go a long way.
Yeah.
Women appreciate that.
Hey, whenever I say yes, honey, I seem to
Perfect.
simmer down the situation a little bit.
Of course.
But the connection aspect, the conversation aspect with a professional like yourself, do you feel like that's going to be a lost art pretty soon with the influence of AI and people more gravitating towards a relationship within their phone and artificial intelligence. And I'm sorry to just
no.
bring this up because
you're
I feel
not.
like that by itself can be a conversation all on its own.
Sure.
But I just, just a quick, reality that you're living in right now based on the influence of artificial intelligence.
Okay.
Because we're on the cusp of that right now.
No, I'd
so-
love to address that question.
Yeah.
So I was a little unusual during COVID, okay? I wanted to see people in my office. I wasn't all weirded out like I'm going to get COVID. And I said, you're welcome to come to my office. If you want to have a mask on, I'm not going to wear a mask. But I want you to sit across from me. If you're not comfortable with that, we'll do it on the phone. We'll do it on the internet. That's fine,
Awesome.
right? Because, it's going to address your question, there's nothing like a face-to-face.
Sure.
There just isn't. Because you're going to miss the nuances. If you're just online with an AI is not going to pick up the nuances. Now, maybe someday it will have the capacity to do that, but you're still going to get an artificial response. You're really not going to get a genuine human response. So do I have a concern about the future of AI? I do, because do I think it's going to replace all therapists? Maybe someday, but not for the foreseeable future, because most people still want to connect to another human, right? Now, but here's my biggest fear about AI, and I'm going to say it.
Tell us.
The biggest fear of AI is that we are going to lose critical analytical thinking. When you went to law school, undergraduate school, and when I certainly went to school, right, you had to think for yourself.
Yeah.
You had to go to the library. You had to do a paper. You had to be creative. You had to do this. You had to do that. 100%. But now people go to college, graduate school, whatever, and they can hook into AI and have a perfect document. They can written better than they ever could.
Absolutely. I mean,
Where's the thinking in that, Chris?
Not much. And I feel like that's a very dangerous
Absolutely.
trade-off. And we all know the benefits of AI. I love it.
100%.
There's things that I can get done a lot quicker.
100%.
Grammar checking, or
Sure.
rather than giving it to an assistant,
Sure.
just cleaning things up through AI before I send it out into the world.
Definitely.
It has its advantages. But
Totally.
it's often from what I'm reading and the way I'm seeing people interact in society now, based on how prevalent it's becoming, the more it's attaching itself to it. Is the trade-off worth it? And for some people, they don't mind it. They don't mind that part. If some, maybe sooner or later we'll have these robots inside of our house doing all the chores or filing our taxes. That's great. But the human element, and like I said, this is a conversation all on its own. What would be the first thing you would notice that we lose if we completely subscribe to AI?
Our patience.
Okay.
Our patience with people.
Sure.
Our ability to sit down and have a conversation. All right? Because I said something earlier before we started the show. I said, a lot of people have the attention span of a gnat.
Yeah.
Okay. So the reality is, right, a lot of people have just kind of lost the art of conversation, the ability to sit across from somebody and talk to them for a while. Pick their brain while they pick yours, right?
Sure.
So one of the complaints, and I'm going a little off script here a little bit, one of the complaints I hear from couples is the wife, sometimes the husband is, you know what? He's on the freaking phone all day long. He doesn't turn it off, ever. And that's a problem.
Sure.
Because what is the meta message? Whatever's on the phone, whether it's politics, news, sports, whatever, is more important than you are. And that's the meta message.
Yeah.
And so that's becoming an epidemic problem in America, as far as I'm concerned, around the world.
Thank you. Thank you for your perspective on that. It's certainly
I'm hitting
something.
a lot of home runs with you today.
Oh,
Chris.
man,
I
it's-
don't know what to tell you, man.
I feel like I'm
going to the World Series of Shrinks.
Yeah, you've pretty much bypassed me asking ChatGPT, so I got it directly from you. So thanks for that. And obviously, Doctor, this conversation isn't just about windfalls, right? It's been about recognizing how an injury can permanently change a relationship, and how courage and care can help rebuild what's rebuildable. Dr. Adams, thank you for guiding us with clarity and compassion, and I hope to see you again pretty soon.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Thank
I
you,
really
Doctor.
enjoyed this.
Me too. We'll do it again.
All right, buddy.
All right.
Take care.